Okay, let's go. Subcommittee will come to order. Good morning. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to our distinguished full committee, my colleagues, our witnesses to the audience. Today is a special occasion for the Interior Subcommittee. We have the Secretary of Agriculture, the Honorable Sonny Perdue, as well as the Chief of Forest Service, Mr. Tom Tidwell, testifying before us. My staff reviewed the committee hearing records as far back as the 1960s, found no mention of the Secretary of Agriculture appearing before the subcommittee on forest issues. I understand your staff jogged the memories of longtime USDA employees, and no one could remember it happening either. So we're breaking new ground today. Secretary, Chief Tidwell, we're pleased and honored to have you both with us. Look forward to hearing from you on the fiscal 2018 budget request for the Forest Service. The President's fiscal year 2018 budget request is a significant departure from the last several fiscal years, with its proposed overall reduction of $900 million, or 16% below fiscal year 2017 enacted level for the Forest Service programs. And again, we have a budget request in which more than 50% of the service's budget is dedicated to fighting fires. We'll have many questions about these cuts and their effects on operations, staffing, and other programs. In particular, this subcommittee continues to be concerned about the cost of fighting wildfires and the effect it has on other Forest Service budgets, programs, and management. I'd like to thank you, Chief Tidwell, for the administration's efforts over the past several years to change the way we budget for fires. I'd also like to thank Congressman Simpson for keeping the pressure on Congress to address the issue. While firefighting costs seem to dominate most discussions about the Forest Service, there are numerous other issues, including aviation management, law enforcement, land acquisition, basic budgeting, program management, among others, that need to be attended to. As I said before, the service must demonstrate that it's accountable, transparent, and able to improve the condition of our national forests, all while managing unpredictable fire seasons. This is not an easy task. Secretary Perdue, we invited you to participate in this hearing in part to help you understand the importance of the Forest Service to this subcommittee, the Department of Agriculture as a whole, and the nation. Healthy, productive national forests provide quality timber and other forest products. They clean our air and water, provide recreational opportunities, and enhance the natural beauty of our country. We understand the challenges facing our national forests and statutes under which they are managed. However, I believe our national forests need a renewed focus on their health and productivity. As Secretary, you can help with that, and I ask you to consider making forest management one of your priorities. For the past 1.5 years, the subcommittee, along with our Senate counterparts, has been investigating the Forest Service accounting, budget, and management practices. We found some areas where improvements were needed. Some of these needed to be addressed by Congress, others could be addressed by the service. In fiscal year 2017 Consolidated Appropriations Act, we, one, imposed fiscal year limits on most Forest Service accounts. The service has not had limits for 20 years or more. We directed the service to standardize its budgeting across the agency. We understand each region does it differently. Directed the service to reduce printing expenditures. The service has significantly higher printing costs than any other USDA agency. Increased oversight of the service by the department's budget office to improve coordination and standardization of budgets. And we required more detailed budget requests in the future. We need more numbers and less narrative. Chief, we appreciate the dedication, creativity, and responsiveness of your budget staff. They're working long hours without complaint to address our concerns and make the Forest Service more accountable, effective, and transparent. The subcommittee is serious about the need for improvements in your accounting, budgeting, and management practices. They need to be especially important if we see large reductions to the service's budget. We must ensure that we are getting the absolute most out of every taxpayer dollar invested in our national forests. We pledge to work with you. Hope you'll also pledge to work with us. Secretary Perdue, Chief Tidwell, I thank you and the entire Forest Service staff for your work to care for the nation's forests. We know that all of you care deeply for our forests and the communities that depend on them. Now I'm happy to yield to the gentle lady from Minnesota, has a few forests of her own, Ms. McCollum, for any opening remarks she would like to make.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have a few for us. Secretary Perdue, it's great to have you here. Chief Tidwell, good to see you again this morning. I would like to first echo the chairman's comments about the subcommittee's commitment to help the Forest Service improve its accounting and its budgeting and its management practice. But at the same time, Chief, I'd like to acknowledge the hard work and cooperation of your budget staff as we move forward on this shared goal. The American people rely on the U.S. Forest Service to responsibly manage the national forest system in a way that sustains health, diversity, and productivity of our nation's forests and grasslands. Now, we can all agree on that a strong America is one where we protect our natural resources for future generations. Being good stewards of those resources requires robust investments in both resource management and the staffing to carry that management out. Unfortunately, President Trump's fiscal year 2018 budget request is a cruel and I believe a reckless plan that pays for lavish tax breaks for billionaires with cuts to the very investments our future families need, our small businesses, and our communities count on. When it comes to the U.S. Forest Service, this budget request is far worse than I could have managed. It slashes many of the important programs that are critical to ensuring the health of our nation's forests. 9 programs are completely eliminated, and states and local units of government must find the resources in their already strained budgets to replace these federal funding streams. The programs within the state and private forestry accounts are particularly important to state and local governments. This account provides resources so that our state partners can manage their forests to protect water quality, provide habitat, forest products, and opportunities for recreation and other public benefits. So sadly, the Trump administration cuts this account by 46%, or $99 million. Again, states, and I'll speak for my state, which is going through a budget process right now, can simply not afford to fill this void that this budget will create. And I'm disappointed that the administration has failed to pursue any proposals to reform the way we fund wildfire costs. As the chairman had pointed out, Mr. Simpson has been working tirelessly on this, and this is a totally nonpartisan support from this committee on this, because the costs associated with fighting wildland fires continue to rise, and this budget illustrates how other important programs suffer when funding is diverted into fighting wildfires. So, Chief, in the past years, you have supported wildfire disaster proposal. And Mr. Secretary, I would ask you to work with the Chief, with the administration, with Mr. Simpson, with all of us, to develop a plan to tackle this issue so that we can fund wildfire fighting in a sustainable fashion. As I pointed out, every member of this subcommittee, especially in the last Congress, was a co-sponsor of Mr. Simpson's wildfire disaster funding bill, and I hope he'll reintroduce it again. If we continue on the path of underfunding programs to manage firefighting, we jeopardize the health and the longevity of America's national forests. So as you can tell, I believe this budget is grossly inefficient. It disregards the jobs, recreational opportunities, the environmental benefits our national forests provide for our health and our economy to be prosperous for all the American people. So I hope that we will reject the proposed cuts and instead work with you to ensure that the service has the resources necessary to remain a leader in natural resources, conservation, recreation management, and of course, with timber. Thank you.
Thank you. And Secretary Perdue, you may begin your statement.
Good morning. I really appreciate, Mr. Chairman, the informal environment here. It's a little different than many other committees we go through, and it's a welcome change. And for that reason, I'm going to forego reading my opening statement. You have that for the record, but I hope we can just have a genuine and transparent conversation this morning over the issues that I have seen already in visiting with 75 of your colleagues during my confirmation process, and we understand that the U.S. Forest Service has had some challenges. I want to thank this committee particularly for being solution-oriented in some of those, and we'll talk about the fire funding as Congresswoman McCollum began talking and mentioned there this morning. It's a serious issue, and as you and I visited in your office, and we've got to right-size that and get ahead of that because you know the challenges there. I also appreciated the fact that you want to hold us accountable. My goal, frankly, as secretary and in the fire service is to earn your trust in management where you will not have to be as prescriptive as you were in the 17 budget. I liked what you said, and in my budget hearings, I've sort of said the same thing in my budget briefings. I want more numbers and less narrative. We're trying to do budget briefings with slides. I want to see the numbers over the historical trends of where we're doing. I view myself as a manager. My goal as governor of Georgia, which I think we made a lot of progress to, is be the best managed, most effective, efficient state in the nation. And by and large, that's my same goal for this department. I want, when we leave our tenure here, I want people to say that's the best managed agency in the U.S. government. And that's focus on facts-based, data-driven, science-based, transparent, ethical, integrity, and with a customer focus, and that means everything. What I heard as I visited, while the U.S. Forest Service has had a wonderful history and a wonderful contribution to the beauty of our nation, I'm not sure we're being as good a neighbor in our U.S. Forest Service as we have been in the past, and that's another one of my goals. Good neighbors treat one another with respect, with dignity. If private landowner neighbors, if they see something going on, then they help one another or give counsel and advice. And we know that our private forests benefit from a combination of good neighborhood. And we want to be a good neighbor within the culture of the communities that the U.S. Forest Service finds itself in that regard. So I look forward to that. Our new motto doesn't deal specifically with the Forest Service, but I think you can imply that as well when we say do right and feed everyone. We want to create jobs. We want to make our rural communities prosper where there was once millions and billions of board feet of timber cut. We know those jobs have disappeared there. Much of it has to do with litigation. I'll talk about that in a second in dealing with that. But fire funding is a huge issue. I look forward to working with this committee, who's been a huge sponsor, Mr. Simpson, kind of the spiritual leader of that effort, to see if we can get that across the goal line. And I'll advocate very strongly, as Ms. McCollum advised, to the administration over, and I think the president gets that from a management standpoint. You cannot, as you and I talked, you cannot manage a budget where you don't know where your emergency or your disaster funds come out. We're over 53% today of the Forest Service budget is in suppression. It should be down like it used to be in the 15 to 20% area, and let us use the rest of the funds wisely in the management of those. So that's a big issue, and I really appreciate you all and your efforts in that regard, and I look forward to working with you to make that a reality in our budgetary system. Certainly, you also know that litigation is a challenge for our U.S. Forest Service. Some of that's maybe been a problem because we haven't been doing as well as we could do in some of those areas. But the Cottonwood case is a particular one in mind. That ruling obviously creates a lot of problems over the continued consultation regarding habitat. If there's any change, I hope we can really look at some legislation to make sure clear to the courts that that only delays all these projects more months and years sometimes. And we've got at least 80 forest management projects at risk of being enjoined through that ruling right now. That's affecting 72,000 acres and over 100 million board feet. Simply, that's jobs. We want to be good environmental stewards. I believe our farms and ranchers and foresters are some of the best natural stewards of the land we can have. And we want to let them do it in a way that makes sense while we regard the habitat and the wildlife and all those things in a reasonable, common sense kind of way. I'll address some of the budget issues that I think are most important here, that we believe that we would like to ask for your help in. When you think about jobs and that our U.S. forests can create, there was one, I think, that was probably ill-advised and maybe not in keeping with the president's wishes as well, and that had to do with our lack of improvements, particularly in roads. You can't harvest lumber on these if you don't have roads to do that. So I know you all will look at that in your consideration and think about the capital maintenance. We don't need a lot more equipment, but you can't get to trees and you can't create jobs without roads to get to them. So we'd like to talk to you about that. And Ms. McCollum mentioned the relationship that we've had. U.S. Forest Service has had great relationships with our state and local forest programs, and I think we need to review that and see how we can restore some relationships there. This is a signal to them that we don't really appreciate that relationship, and I hope that we will do that. So you mentioned several times the management. That's what I think I'm supposed to do. I'm a manager, and that's frankly not in your area, but that's one of the reasons I elevated the rural development program up to my level, because I'm not a micromanager, but I am a hands-on manager, and I plan to be a hands-on manager with the Forest Service, utilizing the good services of a good chief forester, but I'll be directly involved and accountable for the results of that. I know that you all have relied on the chief in years past, but the buck stops here, and we're going to change the Forest Service for the better to make it more responsive to our neighborhoods, our communities, to our mills out there. And once again, we've got a great resource. It's renewable. It's a wonderful blessing, frankly, in this nation to have the kind of forest that we have. And we want to be as equally good managers of our U.S. Forest Service as our private landowners. I come from a state that has amazing private land ownership management there, and we want to take those best practices and spread them across our whole U.S. Forest Service. So I'll stop there and look forward to your questions.
Well, thank you, Mr. Secretary. As I mentioned in my opening statement, the FY17 Consolidated Appropriations Act included several changes as applying for our fiscal year limits to our forest accounts. The House and Senate Appropriations Committee also included directives in the Statement of Managers on expectations regarding improvements to the service's accounting, budgeting, management systems, and practices. And so have you been able to review the changes in the Act and read the statement, Mr. Secretary?
I'm beginning my 5th week on the job, so only at a high level. Obviously, the omnibus came out within that period of time and just recently, so I'm not as specifically detailed. I have the numbers certainly in that area, but once again, my goal is to earn your trust, and as you see changes in management of doing things well in those areas, my goal is to earn more flexibility in that by proving that we can get the job done.
Well, as you go through that and you get more time to look at those changes and directives, we certainly want to work with you and help you and the service improve its processes. We're not here to obstruct or make your life more complicated. We all want the same thing. So we certainly follow. I think those directives are good directives. I hope that you'll feel the same way after you look at them, that they should be followed. We believe the Forest Service needs to impose certainly more discipline in the accounting, budgeting, and management processes, and I know you'll be taking that seriously as we do, and we'll look forward to working with you. I'm going to get somewhat parochial now and talk about California forests, the ones that are still standing. We've had significant fires in California. The Rim Fire is one that comes to mind, but national forests cover about 1/5, which is 20%, 20 million acres of the land in California. People always think of California as an urbanized state, but a significant part of California is not. Fortunately, California's drought of record is now over. It's amazing what 1 year can do. We had a tremendous drought over the last number of years, and we had a tremendous amount of rain this last year. So, however, it caused lasting effects for the forest and expected to permanently alter forest cover in some areas. And we now have more than 100 million dead and dying trees in the state. The state and Forest Service have worked to remove the trees that pose the most risk to communities. However, the work seems to be a little too little and too late. So as the drought continued, why didn't the Forest Service take more decisive action? I think I already know the answer to this question, Chief, but why didn't the Forest Service take more decisive action to remove dead and dying trees?
Well, Mr. Chairman, we've worked closely with the state, with the governor's task force to address, the issue once we started to see the die-off occur, and we have, continued to divert additional funding for the last 2 years, and again this year. Last year we spent $41 million addressing the concern to be able to take out the trees that pose the threat to the public and provide access and ingress into the communities, and also to keep the infrastructure there as far as power lines and also the water facilities. And then this year we are planning have work in progress to use another $37 million to be able to continue to do that work. We struggle with finding any market for this material, and we are able to move a little of it, but that's another challenge that we're dealing with. But we're working closely with the state, and the local communities to be able to continue to address that. And even though, as you mentioned, we've had a very, very favorable moisture year, we do expect to continue to see, more die-off to occur. And so we're actually moving up into the areas more to the north and be able to get out there and instead of just taking out the dead and dying, to also be thinning out the parts of the forest that we haven't seen the mortality yet, to be able to get out ahead of this as we expect to have the lingering effects of the drought.
Well, if I know if you have authority to do this, and if you need additional authority, please let us know, because this is a huge problem in California. We expect the rain's great, but I suspect there's going to be more forest fires because we're going to have a lot more brush that can burn, and that goes into the forest, and that's going to potentially cause a big problem this summer. So hopefully we're ready to deal with it. Ms. McCullum.
Thank you. Could you put that up? Chief Tidwell, I'm putting something up here, and we're handing out
Your
for
mic, okay.
the committee members. I need to talk into it. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is the Voyageurs watershed, and we come from all different parts of the country. And so one of the things as I'm speaking when you're looking at this is this water knows no boundaries. It's going to move. It flows north, not south, because of where we are in the Laurentian Divide, and it affects not only Voyageurs National Park, Superior National Forest. It affects Voyageurs Park and our neighbors to the north in Canada. So, Chief Tidwell, as you know, the Superior National Forest in Minnesota is the home of the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness. It's vast, it's interconnected work of pristine lakes and streams, and this is an untarnished wilderness. It's a national treasure. The Forest Service is responsible for protecting it. Hundreds of thousands of Americans who visit this wilderness every year rely on your agency, as well as the 17,000 Minnesotans who work in the outdoor recreation industry in the northeastern region of our state. And I know that the Forest Service takes this responsibility seriously, because last year the service denied the renewal of mining leases by a foreign-owned company that, as you said, posed an unacceptable risk. The rejection of these lease renewals noted that copper nickel sulfide mining might cause serious and irreplaceable harm to this unique, iconic, and irreplaceable wilderness. Multiple scientific assessments have shown that these sulfide ore mines are sources of toxic contamination, acid drainage that would cause significant harm to the waterways, aquatic life, and the forests that make the BWCA such a special place. And in fact, 92% of these sulfur ore copper mines operating in the United States have experienced failures that impact water quality. And the pictures that are on the other handout that the members have, show what recently happened in 2014 in Canada. And Canada has some of the same stringent, safeguards that we try to put in place. But 92% of these fail. So I want to really give a shout out to the Forest Service for the work that you're currently doing with the Department of Interior to conduct a 2-year science-based study to determine if the acres in the National Forest Land, which are 230,000 acres of National Forest lands within the watershed of the boundary waters, should be off limits to sulfite or copper mining for the next 20 years. Last week, the Forest Service staff confirmed with my office that you're going to have an additional public meeting in the Twin Cities regarding this mining withdrawal. And people from southern Minnesota as well as the Twin Cities are very appreciative of the Forest Service doing this. You've had several hearings in northern Minnesota, but we really appreciate the ability for the folks in the Twin Cities to go forward. So I'm assuming this meeting is moving forward. I'm asking you in public. But could you please talk about the potential consequences for the wildlife, the waters, and the forests in the BWCA and the adjacent lands if there's a discharge, a leak, or a spill from the sulfite mine, all of which are common events for this industry. And I know that you're receiving phone calls. I know you're receiving pressure from the mining industry, and we have a rich tradition of mining in Minnesota, and this is the only mining in Minnesota that I've come out forcefully against, in part because of its location in the watershed. So could you please enlighten us on what, and I'm going to include you, Mr. Secretary, what you two gentlemen can do to ensure that this proposed study goes forward as planned so that we can have robust public participation grounded in science and figuring out how to best preserve this pristine wilderness when 92%, even here in the United States, of these mines fail. And Mr. Perdue, I think you saw what happened to Canada when it leaked up there. Mr. Tidwell?
Well, you've addressed your questions to him, if I may precede him in that, because
yeah,
as
both
I
of
said
you, John.
earlier, the buck stops here. I'm the U.S. Secretary of Agriculture, and the U.S. Forest Service is under the Secretary of Agriculture, while we have a chief forester who knows the history of this and can address those specific questions. I want you to know this is on my radar screen as well. Secretary Zinke and I have already met about this, and I think your statement there regarding the 2-year study over the sound science, none of us, I'm not smart enough to know to do without the facts base and the sound science, and we are absolutely allowing that to proceed. You also know that your state has a shot at that after that recommendation as well. So we are determined to proceed in that effort and let it run its course. No decision will be made prior to the conclusion of that.
Well, thank you, and I will, Governor Dayton will be excited to hear that.
Well,
Thank you.
I'm sure he's already well aware of his roles and responsibilities in that effort.
Well, he's taken the state lands off. Thank you.
Well, the only thing I would add is that the study allows us to really pull together the information and the data and look at the overall balance. Mining is an essential part of multiple use. It's especially very important in your state, but it's also essential for this country. And we can have mining operations that are safe, environmentally safe. There are many that have proven to be able to do that. You do raise the question about the sulfide ore. That is more challenging, especially in areas where we have as much water as we do up in that part of the state. So this gives us an opportunity to be able to pause, collect the information, to be able to visit and really meet with the public. And it's more to be able to comments. We just want to be able to sit down with them and really hear from their concerns. And then as we move forward, to find that balance. The balance for mining needs to occur, and it can be done in a safe, environmental way. And then if decisions are to be made for other areas that it's just potentially maybe too hazardous, those are the type of decisions that can come out of this study.
Well, I thank you, gentlemen, for your comments, and I thank you for your reassurance to let the 2-year study go forward. Thank you.
Let me give you maybe a principle that may help you feelings that way. While our motto is do right and feed everyone, as a veterinarian, I also ascribe to the Hippocratic Oath. First of all, do no harm. And we hear you loud and clear.
Thank you. And as I look at this map of these beautiful pristine lakes, it reminds me of Minnesota's greatest export to California, the Los Angeles Lakers. So I always appreciate that.
Yes, Jerry West was a hero of mine. I do remember when Mr. West left.
Yeah, Mr. Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here, Secretary. As the chairman mentioned, this is the first time I can ever remember, and maybe the first time ever, that the Secretary has appeared before this committee along with the Chief of the Forest Service, and it's almost, when I look back at it, it was almost like there was the Department of Agriculture and the Forest Service. And the Forest Service is going to stay under the Department of Agriculture. We've had hearings and stuff about trying to move them over into a land management agency with Interior. I don't see that happening. They do a good job where they're at. In fact, I will tell you, I've had a lot of dealings with the Forest Service over the years, and while we sometimes complain about them because, you know, I count 62 people in this room. That means there's 62 different people or 62 different ideas about what ought to be done with the national forests and how any particular decision ought to be made. So these are public lands, and the public has a right to say how they're managed. The question is, and you brought it up with the Cottonwood case and other things, how do you maintain the public's right to have a say in how their public lands are managed and yet get on with managing instead of spending all the resources we use in lawsuits? I once asked a former chief of the Forest Service, when you decide to make a decision on, say, a timber cut or any decision that you make, how much of the money is spent making what you believe to be a good, sound, scientific decision, and how much trying to make it bulletproof from a lawsuit? And he said, you know, given the decision, it's probably between 25 and 50% on making a good, sound, scientific decision, and between 50 and 75% trying to make it bulletproof. Wouldn't it be nice if we could use some of that money to actually manage the public lands? In this Cottonwood case, and I'm glad you brought it up, it is a perplexing problem that we need to address legislatively. I don't have the answer about how we change some of these laws, and you could go through the litany of them, to maintain the public's right to have a say and yet streamline it. But we've created situations where you can get sued at every step of the way, and there are multiple steps all along the way, and it's just unmanageable, frankly. But thank you also for mentioning the fire borrowing. We need your help. We need Secretary Zinke's help, along with this committee's, to make everyone understand the importance of addressing this issue. The fire borrowing has gotten out of hand. When 53% of your budget goes to fighting wildfires, that means there's no money left for anything else. That's one of the reasons my constituents complain about the Forest Service. They're not doing any trail maintenance. They're not doing fuels reduction or whatever. And I noticed in your budget that hazardous fuels reduction numbers are down, trail maintenance numbers are down, land and water conservation numbers are down. Well, we're spending all the money on fighting wildfires. And when they come up to me and say, you know, I was out hiking and they hadn't done any maintenance on this trail, why haven't they? I say, well, you know, we've appropriated money for them, but guess what? It's gone to fight wildfires. And unfortunately, I don't know if this is a good idea or not, but what happens is, because the Forest Service, and they're pretty damn good firefighters, they do a darn good job when they look at the number of fires that they actually put out on initial attack. It's the 2% that blow up that cause the problems. But we allow the Forest Service to borrow from every other fund to fight wildfires. It's an emergency sort of thing, unlike any other agency or account. I've thought of working with Chairman Calvert and see if we can strike that language that's in our appropriation bill. It says you can't borrow from the other accounts. Reason being, when the rest of the members of Congress look at the end result and say, well, they must have had the money to do it because they fought the wildfires, they didn't run out of money, what they don't see is what is not done because they're borrowing the money. And if we stopped the borrowing legislatively, I would rather do it with our fire bill, but if we could stop the borrowing legislatively, it would force the Forest Service to come to Congress for a supplemental. And then people would understand what the true cost of fighting these wildfires are. And when you look at it, it's gone from what, 14% of the Forest Service budget 30 years ago to 53% now, and it's projected to be over 70% in the next 10 years if nothing's done about it. But we need your help, as well as members of Congress and outside groups also, to make our leadership and others understand the importance of addressing this issue. And while I don't have a question in there, I will tell you that within the budget, and I know that you've just come on and this is, and your job is to support the president's budget. I understand all that. I do have some concerns about the reduction in the hazardous fuels management, the trail maintenance, the LWCF, and some other areas within this budget. If you really want to see what LWCF has done, when you're out to Idaho, I'll take you down South Fork and some other things, and it's been incredible what LWCF funds have done there. I noticed, Chief, that you said when you were talking with the chairman about what you're going to do in North Carolina or Northern California, close to North Carolina, that you're going to go out and you need to go in and thin these forests. And I suspect the reason you haven't done that is because you don't have the money. Last year, when we were hiking at the end of August and the fires were going on, you said, you know, pretty shortly we should be out doing some hazardous fuels reductions, some backfires, and those kind of things, or not backfires, but fire mitigation and those types of things. Problem is, we've spent all our money on wildfires, and the money's not available. So, I mean, that's a real challenge for how we get a hold of this. I don't know how you manage a budget where 53% of it is unknowable. But let me also tell you, and since I don't really have any questions in there, I do want to tell you, I have, as I said, there are a lot of people who complain about land management in the West. That's where most of the public lands are, whether it's BLM, Forest Service, Park Service, whatever. And there is movements to try to have the states take over all the federal lands. I don't see that happening either. It would not happen in Idaho. I don't want it to happen in Idaho because, frankly, we live in Idaho because we love our public lands. We're oftentimes upset with our land managers because, as I said, in this room, every one of us could do a better job of managing the forest sometimes, or the BLM, or whatever, or we think we could. We're all good Monday morning quarterbacks. They have a tough job. And I tell you, you got some great employees out in Idaho that I've had the opportunity to work with that do a fantastic job, and I found that true throughout the Forest Service. For as much criticism as they get, they really try to manage an almost untenable position between the public that wants and believes something ought to be done one way, and what I've seen them do is try to work with the public, and as you mentioned, try to become advocates for trying to solve a problem. Now, maybe they can't do it the way the individual wants it done, but what I've seen is they'll sit down and try to solve this problem, or whatever that problem is. And I'm proud to call these people my friends that have worked out in Idaho and have done a great job of maintaining our public lands out there, and the reason people want to come to Idaho. So when you're out there Friday visiting the NIFC, I'd like to try to make it back with you. It's an incredible place. Welcome to Idaho early.
I'll respond to your non-question.
Okay.
I think certainly the litigant issue is something we all need to be looking at, whether it's a retooling of the NEPA process or those kind of things that are, and the fact is, in your job and in our jobs, we're never going to please everybody. That's what representative democracy is all about. But we've got to make the principles of good facts-based, data-driven, sound science decisions and then move forward. I do believe we in the Forest Service have probably been a little intimidated and practiced defensive forestry over this bulletproofing decisions that way and may have rolled over. I'm willing to go to court on some of these things if we're doing right. And if we got a good scientific base for our decisions, I think we need to be in court. And if that's what the other side chooses to do, I think we need to win some of those decisions. And but first of all, we got to get our house in order of doing the right thing. And I hope that we will be able to prevail on your best choice, which is the fire budget rather than the nuclear option of preclusion, because if that would put the chief and us in a pretty untenable position having a fire. You can't predict a hurricane, you can't predict a tornado, you can't predict a flood, neither can you predict a major forest fire. And the challenge is, as you indicated, typically 1 to 2% is all we need. If we can get that into the disaster budget like these other natural disasters, the Forest Service is perfectly capable of managing all these others and then managing the forest. I will note budgetarily, you mentioned some of those specific line items. The forest management budget is up 16%. So again, from a flexibility standpoint, if we're not too handcuffed over those kind of things, we're going to take that increase in forest management and do the things that make for healthy forest.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Mr. Kellner.
Mr. Chair, I'll yield to Ms. Pingree because I know she's got to get to another subcommittee.
Okay.
Thank you. I appreciate my colleague yielding to me because I know he has to go to another subcommittee too. But I appreciate that, and I apologize in advance having to go to my other committee after this, so I'll just be here briefly. But it's nice to see you again, Mr. Secretary. It was a pleasure to have you in the Agriculture Committee yesterday, and thank you for giving us so much time there. And also for being here today, and Chief Tidwell, it's nice to see you again. My colleagues on the committee have mentioned some of their concerns with the budget, and I'll submit a variety of things for the record. I'm concerned that there's 9 programs that are zeroed out, in particular the Forest Legacy Program, which has been very important to us in Maine. I'm concerned about the cuts at the Land and Water Conservation Fund, but I just want to focus my brief time on 2 other programs that actually are quite important to us and have your comments. First one is on the family forestry and forest stewardship. Coming from Maine, I know everyone has a lot of forests, but of course, we think we have bigger challenges and more of everything. 86% of our state is forested, and I think that might be the highest percentage of any state. We don't always think about Maine or New England as having so many forests, but we're particularly proud of them, but we also have a lot of challenges and want to make sure that they're preserved and well taken care of. We have about 264 million acres of land, which are basically in private ownerships. Unlike many of the western states, we have virtually no federal land and a lot of private landowners. The Forest Stewardship Program leverages millions from our state budget and from landowners themselves. It's helped landowners learn how to better manage their land, navigate numerous challenges to help them determine how to change their land management in changing situations and adapting to new market conditions to stay financially viable. So that has been very important to us in very changing times. The forest products industry in our state has a big footprint. In 2016, the total economic impact of forest products was estimated at $8.5 billion. It accounts for more than 33,000 jobs. That may not seem a lot if you come from California, but in a state of 1.3 million people, it's very important to our state. But we've had a lot of changes in the forest products industry. In the last few years, we've seen 5 paper mills close their doors. That's been devastating to communities throughout our state and a huge change for us. My colleagues and I in the Maine delegation worked with our local industry and community leaders to request that the Economic Development Administration coordinate and mobilize its federal partners to participate in an economic development assessment team. The goal of the EDIT was to help the industry, along with the state, local, and federal leaders, not only to coordinate their work, but work together, combine their efforts and resources to support our forest industry. I spent about 3 days, and the groups did site visits around the state of Maine and learned a lot about our industry and our forests. And there were a lot of long-term strategic goals as well as some immediate next steps in what they were doing. The most direct request was for the Forest Service to work with industry to define specific technical assistance, data, and other strategic resources that could support the forest industry aspect of the strategic plan. These efforts are already underway within our state, and we know that there will be additional modeling and support through the Forest Service. So between the EDIT and the forestry industry and forestry stewardship program, they're just very important to us. And Mr. Secretary, if you'd like to comment, thank you. And Mr. Chief, if you want to, those are just things that we just hope will be there in the future and need your support and help.
I would comment on the fact that, Ms. Pingree, I think the way to accomplish more in tight budgetary times really is with public-private partnerships, and that's one of the ways we hope to do more with less. The forest stewardship program with private landowners is one of those. And I also come from a state where over 95% of them privately managed, and our citizens have utilized those, I think, in a very wise way, and developed some best practices along with our state foresters and our federal partners to do that. So I concur with you. Obviously, rural prosperity is a big part of what we do overall. I think Mr. Simpson earlier talked about timber and U.S. and agriculture. In Georgia and your state, timber is agriculture.
Right.
And that's the way we view it. So we're going to do everything we can from a rural prosperity. In Maine, means helping your small organic farmers, as we talked about yesterday, but it helps your private landowners in that renewable resource that grows so well in your beautiful state.
Thank you, and I do appreciate that there are a lot of similarities between Georgia and Maine, except the temperature, where we have a lot in common.
Our lobsters don't grow as well.
Yeah. And don't start trying.
Mr. Jenkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, congratulations. Welcome. Chief, great to see you. I'd like to maybe ask about two things in particular. The Monongalia National Forest, a big chunk in my district. We call it the Mon. And last year in June, we had a once-in-a-thousand-year floods in West Virginia, devastating. Almost, I guess, over 24 loss of life. The Mon took a real hit. And working with the Forest Service, working with the local superintendent, I know you've also been working with Federal Highways. What can you share with me as an update? The estimate was tens of millions of dollars in damage to roads and trails and infrastructure. Where are we in that work? If you're able to update me. And secondly, what does the road ahead vis-a-vis this funding cycle in the budget that's been proposed?
We have, continuing to still collect information about all the damage that's occurred, because we've also, just in the last few weeks, have had additional flooding in West Virginia. And we are working closely with Federal Highways to be able to use their emergency road funding, and we're making applications for that and going through a process to really prioritize what is the absolutely most important projects to get completed and the most urgent, to realize that it's going to take a while, and it's, as the Secretary mentioned, it's going to take a need for all of us to work together, the state, the counties, the federal agencies, to come together to be able to address this. But first focus, of course, is going to be on public safety, especially in some bridges, et cetera, to be able to, maintain the highest priority roads. Some of those are actually used for school routes, for school bus routes, et cetera. So that's what we're doing, and as we're completing the analysis, we're out there doing the urgent stuff to be able to get as many of these roads open. But it's going to be a little while, and I'd be glad to provide you a more extensive update.
I would welcome that. We're obviously very engaged with it. We've got incredible need. This is the time, as we've seen since last June, to yes, collect the information, the assessment, make the down payment, but also we understand this is a journey, not a point-in-time conclusion. So we really, truly want to work with the Forest Service, your local superintendent. We want to help make sure you do get that data collection. We want to make sure that I want to make sure I'm doing what I can from a funding standpoint to address those. I'm trying to avoid any surprises 6 months from now or a year from now that, well, the money just wasn't there. So please make sure we're fully aware of the needs as identified. The second, and also for you, Chief, but certainly plays on what the Secretary referenced, still relating to the Mon, with regard to the forest management and in particular the timber sales. This is just a ongoing frustration and challenge that we have seen, and I just need to figure out how to break this logjam, pardon the pun. We have, the Mon is 919,000 acres, 12% set aside as wilderness. but under the allowable sales quantities under the forest plan, each year for the last 4, 5, 6 years, we've only been selling 12% of what's allowed. And this is, so for example, in 2016, only 12% was sold. 2015, 10% was sold. 2014, 13% were sold. What are the impediments to a forest plan objective that has an allowable sale quantity, but each year we are in the 10, 11, 12% actually sold? What's going on? What can we do about it? This is basic good forest management practices.
First of all, I share your frustration, and there's a combination of things that several members and Secretary have already mentioned that we're working on. And your forest has quite the history when it comes to environmental issues that go way back in time. But we've been able to move forward on many of those concerns. And so today where we're at is to be able to find more capacity. And one of the things that where we're making, I think, some great progress is using the Good Neighbor Authority that you provided with the 2014 Farm Bill, so that we can work with the state forester and their staff to be able to actually get more work done out on the ground and use their capacity, and also to be able to learn from them. Many of our states have, I believe, some better practices than some of the things that we have in place that I can argue were put in place years ago because of certain lawsuits, et cetera. But we're finding by being able to use the Good Neighbor Authority and working with the states, we're able to actually get more work done, get more timber harvested, and then to be able to do it in a way that we can cover the state's costs. So that's one of the things that we're really making some good progress on it. And I think your forest especially is one that is well placed for us to move out using that authority.
Well, if progress is being defined as percentage of allowable sold, we're not making progress. So
I hear you loud and clear, Mr. Jenkins. Those numbers that you just described are pretty frustrating to me, and we'll have a better answer and a better reason by the next time I come before you. I put this chart, Mr. Chairman, in your package there, and our forests are renewable resources. Forests are just like us and animals. If you don't do something with them while they're healthy, they die. And then they create more problems with fire and other things. So these are not good statistics here. And our goal is to make sure that we harvest the renewable part of our forest. We'd love to have that balance. We talked about some of the root causes regarding the budget and the management aspect, but that's absolutely my goal, is to use resources from a jobs, from a revenue standpoint. These are crops. Those are crops there that ought to be harvested for the benefit of the American public.
a breath of fresh air, Mr. Secretary. We look forward to working with you. We look forward to that better answer, and we look forward to getting her done. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kilmer.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for being with us. I've got one question for the Secretary and one for the Chief. Mr. Secretary, as everyone's extending invitations to you, I will also. We had the honor of having your predecessor come out to the Olympic Peninsula just to see how important the Forest Service lands are to the rural timber-dependent communities that I represent, and to visit with a forest collaborative that we have there that is really making progress and trying to actually increase harvest levels in a responsible way. We've got the conservation community and the industry at the same table working through some of these tough issues. And I think it addresses a couple of the issues that you raised. One, the value of public-private partnership, and two, trying to reduce litigation when it comes to timber sales. I guess having said that, I'm somewhat surprised to see the elimination of funding for the Collaborative Forest Landscape Restoration Program in the budget, because I just think it is fundamentally important to sound stewardship, and was hoping that you could just speak to what the rationale was for that program elimination.
Well, certainly beginning my job here, I support the budget and its conclusions, but I think probably it would have been a little different had we been there long enough to have an impact in that area. The reason we were given was some duplicative programs, but I already expressed my desire to see more public-private partnerships, and we hope to persuade others in administration that we think we can get more bang for the buck that way.
Well, we'd certainly love to have you see the success, but that our collaborative has had, and but we need more help. And,
As for the visit, I hope to get your way soon. We're heading that way. We were in the Black Hills over the past weekend. We're going to be in Idaho next weekend, so we're moving your way.
if you get any further west than me, you're in. So be careful.
We're not going to Victoria Island.
Chief Tidwell, I think the last time I saw you was at an event celebrating the Legacy Roads and Trails program and the removal of the 1,000th culvert. And it was a pretty spectacular event in that you had recreationalists there and sports fishermen and a bunch of different stakeholders celebrating both the economic and ecological benefits of what's a pretty modest program from the grand scheme of things. And I guess this is another one where I was pretty shocked to see a full elimination of that program. According to your own budget justification, since 2008, Legacy Roads and Trails has restored fish passage at 1,000 sites, providing access to over 1,000 miles of habitat, improved almost 18,000 miles of road for safety and flood resiliency, constructed or reconstructed 141 bridges for safety, upgraded or fixed 4,390 miles of trails so people can actually enjoy the areas that they love, and created or maintained 800 to 1,200 jobs annually. It's really hard to argue with the success of this program, so I'm hoping you can help me understand the rationale for eliminating it.
Well, I'd just like to basically repeat what the Secretary said, but one of the reasons this, the funding that's provided with the Legacy Roads and Trails, we can do that same work with our trails budget and with our roads budget. And where it's been an effective program to really focus on the legacy work to be able to improve and deal with stream crossings and culverts, et cetera, it is something we can do within our other budget items. And we are going to continue to do that work and be able to build on the partnership, but we'll be able to continue that with our other budget line items.
I think prior to your coming in, there were two budget items that we would love to have your help on, and obviously trails is one of those. And we know from an economic perspective, as well as a recreation perspective, if you can't maintain, you can't get to it, you can't cut trees, and you can't enjoy the beautiful landscape. So we acknowledge those and appreciate your help there.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Mr. Perdue. Congratulations on your new responsibilities. Chief, thank you for the time and I think extraordinary effort you've made in some cases to help people in rural West. I know of one example where you flew out to my district in Utah. You met with some of our county commissioners and flew back the same day. And I think that's an example of you trying to make yourself available and trying to hear them, and I think that's so important. I love the fact that you're here together. And I'd like to mimic something you said, Mr. Secretary, if I could, and that is these are our forests are national jewels. I mean, there's a reason I live in Utah. It's because I love Utah, and part of that is loving the forest, but they're also a resource. And as you said, Mr. Secretary, they're a crop. They're a renewable resource, and properly managed, they can be a very effective economic and resource that we could take such advantage of. I'd like to make one point very quickly and then come to you, Chief, if I could, for an issue that I have that I'm concerned about. We often talk about their value to us in timber, and that's been brought up several times here. But when I hike, as I often do in Utah, I used to when I had a life before I came to Congress. But, it wouldn't be unusual to see, cattle grazing in our forest. And my father-in-law has a permit where he would graze his cattle in the forest. Do we agree, and again, this is a simple question, we agree that that's a part of management as well and taking proper advantage of this resource?
Absolutely. I'd like to expand on that a little bit. By the way, I was in Rapid City, South Dakota this last weekend, and we're at Ellsworth Air Force Base. there was a little airplane over there I think you may be familiar with.
A little airplane, yeah.
Got up in the cockpit of the B-1, and I kind of chided them from stealing that from Robbins Air Force Base. But
Well-
we had a National Guard group down there, wing, that flew that airplane. I'd been in it before, but I
Well, we
thought-
can agree it is the sexiest aircraft ever built, right?
and pretty effective as well. But on your specific question, certainly, in your area as well, I think grazing is a realistic management. I was in northern Nebraska over our grasslands there, and there's a reasonable, our cattle ranchers are doing things on their own lands that thrive and make good management practices. We want to adopt more of those. I hope that, frankly, I hope Secretary Zinke and I and you can go out to your area and get and hear from your people, not just the elected officials, but hear from those cattle people, hear from those people who have to deal with our Forest Service and our BLM lands. And let's really develop a level of trust and a good neighbor policy there that's more than just name. We got a good neighbor policy in the officially, but that, being a good neighbor is more than just saying I'm one.
Yeah.
So I hope we can do that in
And-
your area.
And Mr. Secretary, I'm so grateful to hear you say that. I can tell you I grew up ranching and farming, and no one cares about that land more than those individuals who are, their livelihood depends on that resource being healthy. And they are as intrinsically interested in protecting it as anyone I can imagine. Chief, if I could come to you with the problem, as I said, I'm a little bit frustrated, and I think we've talked about it before. 2014, the Department of Labor instituted a rule regarding overtime and minimum wage for federal employees, which they had the right to do, and I don't object to that. Where we have a problem is that it caught up, I think, individuals that it was never intended to be. That's outfitters and guides who work in the rural West. People who take people on horseback rides, river rafting, et cetera, who help tourists and people who otherwise wouldn't be able to experience the West because they just wouldn't do it on their own. But they were defined as a federal employee because they happened to traverse federal lands, or in some cases operate on federal lands. And, we worked with the department, again, in this case, the Department of Labor, for a year, more than a year, trying to get them to relook at this and saying this isn't the intent. They actually agreed with us, at least they told us they did, but nothing came from that. We included legislation in the appropriations, or language in the FY16 appropriations bill, which would have exempted them from this. And I got to say, before I make my final point, these aren't big corporate outfits and guides. These are mom and pop shops, people who are making a lot less money than most of us here in this room. And they just simply can't afford it. I mean, an outfitter out there hits 40 hours in the first 2 days, and after that he's got to be paid overtime on a minimum wage, a federal defined minimum wage. It frustrates me that it seems like the Forest Service has ignored the intent of Congress because their permit requires still that they comply with this. I wonder if you could give us some relief on that and some hope that we could work together to come to what I think most of us agree is a reasonable conclusion.
I appreciate you bringing it back up against. We'll go back to see what we can do to address that and continue to work with the Department of Labor. I agree with your point that most of the outfitter and guide operations I know are usually family operations, and it's relatives, or you could even say they're all part owners in that operation. And I don't even think they work by the hour; they just work by the day, and to provide that service. And it's one of the things that we worked with Department of Labor, and we'll continue to do that to be able to address a solution there so that it doesn't have unintended consequences impacting their operations.
Well, I appreciate that, Chief, and we will pursue that with you. And if I could just conclude, and Mr. Secretary, it seems like you want to respond.
I think there are a lot of unintended consequences regarding that labor rule that we want to look at as it pertains to the USDA. And obviously, outfitting is a seasonal job. They don't work year-round. Seasons don't last that long. And that caught up a lot of seasonal workers that is very intense for a period of time. That's when they have to that's when they have to work and make their money. And so we'll be very attentive to that.
Well, please do, and I maybe conclude with this. I've met with many of these owners, dozens of times, I suppose, but I've also met with generally college kids who came to me and said, look, I don't get to do what I used to love to do. I was more than happy to do this for the wage they were paying me. I was doing it because I love it. And now my job's gone away. And now I'm working, at Walmart or McDonald's when I'd much rather be out showing people the land. So thank you, and we look forward to working with you on that. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Ms. Capter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you.
And Chief Tidwell, thank you for your service to our country, both of you. According to the numbers that I have, and I hope they're correct, in the fiscal year of 16, the Forest Service had a budget of $7.03 billion. For this fiscal year, what was finally signed into law was $6.17 billion. And for the proposal we are reviewing now, it's gone down to $5.20 billion. That's a cut of 26% over the last 3 years. That is, in my judgment, enormous, enormous. I don't come from the West. I come from up where the U.S. border meets the Canadian border. Over Lake Erie, Congressman Joyce and I share this very important region with the shallowest of the Great Lakes in deep trouble. When I look at this budget, I see that though Ohio is not like Utah and California and big western states with big federal forest lands, trees are terribly important to us. Lake Erie has the least number of trees of any of the Great Lakes. We have the most threatened of the Great Lakes. My home community of Toledo, Ohio, which has water systems that serve a region of half a million to 750 million people plus businesses, was shut off 2.5 years ago for 3 days because a very wicked little toxin called microcystin that forms in algae got into the water system. It is not the only water system on Lake Erie that's been shut off. Many of our rural water systems have been shut off over the last couple of years. They didn't get a lot of publicity because we're not New York City, we're not Chicago, we're out there on Lake Erie. And I'll tell you what, it was completely frightening. And we live with this hanging over our heads every day, and the situation is not getting better. I won't go into all the details of what we're trying to do to address it, but because we don't have the full engagement of the Forest Service along Lake Erie, because we are using the Urban and Community Forestry Program, which this budget proposes to eliminate, the Community Forest and Open Space Program, the Landscape Scale Restoration Program, public-private partnerships, great metro parks. We're trying to find ways to deal with planting 20 million trees we have to replace just because of the emerald ash borer, just to keep pace with an inadequate number of trees to begin with, to operate as buffer strips to help to filter the nutrients going into Lake Erie through a river called the Maumee River, the largest river. God gave me the largest river in the Great Lakes, and with no resources to try to fix what's wrong. The NRCS has been great, Mr. Secretary, in trying to help us figure out what do we do with a tri-state binational watershed in order to prevent these nutrients from going into the rivers and streams and flowing toward the lake. And your NRCS people in Ohio have been phenomenal, but they're under-resourced. There's no political jurisdiction that can put their arms around this region, and it's frightening to see what's happening. Cleveland, at the eastern end of my district and the western end of David's district, used to be called Forest City. And with the levels of asthma there and other issues and many urban areas, I frankly take it as a personal offense that the government of the United States, not you, but that the government of this country doesn't consider the Great Lakes in our urban areas important enough to focus on trees. We're always off, in other areas that I feel sorry for because there's not enough money to keep trails. Deferred maintenance in this budget is eliminated. Legacy and Trails program eliminated. Facilities accounts, 84% cut. I mean, I feel sorry for you. Trying to take over this, I keep thinking, where are we going to get some private sector people to donate money to fill the gap here? But I would love to invite you to our region because it is the canary in the coal mine. Your dad, I like this quote, "We're all stewards of the land, owned or rented, and our responsibility is to leave it better than we found it." I couldn't agree more. NRCS sponsored a book one time called Land, Food, and People. I loved it. But there was a word missing, and that was water. And what we face in our region is that in the watershed that I represent, there's 2 watersheds I represent, but the one that's causing the most problems that extends over 3 states in Canada, there are 2 million people that live in that watershed. There are between 10 and 11 million animals, the largest egg-producing region in the whole country, and 43,500 train car loads of manure every year, much of it put on the land. And we got no answer. When I was born, there were 146 million people in this country. Today, there are 320 million. By 2050, we will have 390 million, according to the latest projections. And somehow the formula for land, food, water, and people, to say nothing of temperature changes, it's not a winning formula. So we would invite you to our region. We would fly in your helicopter if you want to. But we have a, NRCS has to play a role in this. I have a bill to recreate the Civilian Conservation Corps to help the whole country, including our area. And I got some ideas about it would require more than USDA. It would require Department of Labor, National Guard. We got to fix this. And I want to do it in my lifetime so that we do what your dad said. In our time and generation, it's our responsibility. And unfortunately, we don't have structure to do it. I think NRCS is one of the few structures we really have, but it's not used to working across jurisdictions, states, and we need its help. So we've got the problem. We don't have the mechanism to fix it. And the problem is getting ahead of us, just like in the West. I'll tell you, I don't live in the West. The forest fires scare me to death because I studied a little bit about forest succession. I worry about the eastern forest as well as the western forest. We're not taking care of this problem for the country. We simply aren't. And it's not true to our heritage. I just thank all the people that work for the Forest Service. I feel sorry for the firefighters, all those people that risk their lives up there all the time. We're not doing our job. And we got to figure out a way to do it. If we have to beg the private sector and go to Goldman Sachs and all these people that ripped off the people of the United States and beg the money, I'm willing to do it. But we got to fix this. So my extension of invitation is very serious. We need your help. And we need it fast. Ohio and Michigan, if we could figure out how to plant 20 million trees in the next 5 years, that wouldn't be enough, but it'd be a heck of a lot better than our limping along what we're doing now. So that's just my statement and my concern about your budget, and we will work with you and our great chairman and ranking member to try to produce something better by the
Thank you, Marcy.
time.
Appreciate your
appropriation
concern and
cycle
your
is over.
passion. I've heard great things about the Great Lakes Restoration Project. I think we were making progress in that, as well as the Chesapeake, and we hope we'll have the opportunity to continue that. As a former governor, I know how this government works. We've got an executive branch that proposes, we've got an appropriation branch that legislates and appropriates, and we've got a judicial branch. So I hope all together we can come together and address some of those concerns, certainly, so we can leave it better than we found it.
Thank you. Mr. Joyce, the Great Lakes are well represented here today. So.
Secretary Perdue, Chief Tidwell, thank you very much for being here today. And I was happy to hear you call trees an actual agricultural product, having owned a small Christmas tree farm. I thought this would be a wonderful way for our family to all work together, and I found the kids only liked it when they were selling the trees and giving out candy canes and not much else during the course of the year. But I would like to follow up on my colleague from Ohio, Ms. Kaptur's comments about the Emerald Ash Borer. And you brought up the GLRI, and you happen to be able to get some of the money to help prevent what is a 100% mortality rate with with the Emerald Ash Borer. Now, I understand that only the Wayne State Forest is in Ohio, and I was wondering, I know it's not part necessarily of your purview, but whether you're doing anything to help prevent or help people surrounding those or other non-governmental entities surrounding the systems to try to combat this emerald ash borer because, having lost them in my own yard, they say once they're in there, boom, your trees are all dead within years. I mean, there's really become a problem. The grow is restricted. You can't even use it for firewood, transferring to county, and we really need some help.
Chief can address this specifically, but my goal, my principles are, in cooperation, the Forest Service is just almost like the Ag Extension Service. We've got an education, a research, education, communication network out here, and that's where many of these private partnerships working with state and private landowners have been so effective in communicating what they can do. I've got a picture here in the west that talks about good forest management and how it impacts that. So the chief may know more specifically about the emerald borer, but the principle is we want Forest Service to be an educational tool to get best practices both for private lands and for public lands.
I got to tell you, Mr. Secretary, that's music to our ears because part and parcel of the GLRI is also educating the farmers to reduce the amount of fertilizer, and they get higher yields with less fertilizer. But when the state comes in and says they're going to cut down on the amount they could use, well, the first thing a guy does is overloads the field and to make sure he's in before the edict is actually implemented. So you really want to try to educate him, and there's so many ways they could do that now. I'm amazed that I was in one combine with a guy who's got his iPad, not even touching the steering wheel, and we're going down the field, and he's measuring the soils and less fertilizer, higher yields. It all works, but it's going to take education, just what you're saying.
It would, and technology and rural broadband connectivity, they depend on being able to connect into the data systems that do that. So there are a lot of opportunities, a lot of challenges, but that's why we're here, and I look forward to visiting your area. I'm not as familiar with the border of Lake Erie as I could be. Lived in Ohio for down at Columbus in the middle 70s in the Air Force, but didn't make it up to your beautiful area.
Just love to have you. And if you like to fish, we have some pretty good fishing,
Oh,
too.
that's what I
Chairman
hear.
Calvert wants to come, too, get some walleye. Excuse me, Chief.
Well, just quickly, we still haven't found a solution to the emerald ash borer, and our scientists are working with the other ag agencies and also with universities to find some type of, ideally, a biological control on this pest that came into this country through one of our ports and now has spread all the way up to Canada. One of the things we are working with is places to get out in front of it and actually have to clear out the ash to just be able to stop the spread. That's one of the things, one of the tools that's been helpful. But that's when you're out in the country, that's something you can do. But as it's going through communities, it's not what people want to see their ash trees cut down. So it's just still challenging. But it does, make the point about our research and development branch of the Forest Service that we work very closely with the other agencies and universities for us to be able to maintain that. And this budget request does allow us to be able to maintain our research with emerald ash borer to be able to find that solution. And at the same time, to be able to do what we can to prevent the next pest from coming in to this country, through our ports.
Would the gentleman yield? Would the gentleman yield? just a
Absolutely.
second? Could I just ask, on the emerald ash borer and the loss of ash trees, do you know, sir, how many we've lost already and what the projected loss is and what percentage that comprises of our ash tree population? I just know Ohio and Michigan. I don't know the whole country number.
I can provide that information to you, but it is, it's devastating, the ash in the east, and if we can't find a solution to this, there's a high likelihood we will lose the ash tree from the eastern United States. I wish I had a more positive response, but that's the challenge we're up against.
Isn't that what's used to make baseball bats?
Yes.
Baseball's gone. Then we're into basketball.
Aluminum.
If you go through one of the communities I represent, it's like you take a razor and you just zzz, you go right and they're gone. It's
Wow.
it's astounding.
Okay,
But thank you both.
all right, thank you.
Back, Mr. Chairman.
I have a number of questions I'm going to submit to you for the record, but one thing I'd like to talk about quickly is some of our Forest Service aviation assets. As you know, we had $65 million in the FY15 account. That was to acquire a HC-130J, So I was wondering what the status of that acquisition is, and when do you expect to award the contract? And do you anticipate the award will be contested?
We're currently reviewing the bids we received to acquire an aircraft, and I expect I can report back to the committee in the next few weeks on the progress of that. And as to the second question, that's always just part of the process.
My question would be, how many people make the 130J?
I think you know what state it's from, too. You might like that aircraft. Also, the Defense Authorization Act in 2014, as you remember, transferred 7 HC-130Hs from the Coast Guard and 15 C-23 Sherpas from the Army to the Forest Service. And we provided $130 million for the planes to be retrofitted. So I'd like to get the status of where those aircraft are at right now, what's the status of those transfers, if they've happened, and where are we at on the retrofit?
We'll be flying 1H again this summer, and then in FY19, we will have 2 of the C-130Hs with the tank installed, and then in FY20, we'll have 4 more, and then by FY21, we'll have all 7 of those with the tanks installed. There was an issue with the contract the Air Force was using to install the tanks. It slowed down the progress there, but as they have put on the new wing boxes on those planes, we take one each year and we fly that with the MAFS unit and then rotate that back in to be able to get the internal tank installed.
Good. Ms. McCullum?
Thank you, but back to just the aircraft. When I was up in northern Minnesota talking to the pilots, it's really hard to get pilots right now because of what's going on in the industry. So I hope as we get the planes, we can retain the pilots. And if you need any flexibility with how you go about retaining and recruiting pilots, please keep us apprised. Mr. Chair, I'm also going to submit some questions for the record as Secretary Perdue and Mr. Tidwell know. We want to be helpful on the backlog of the maintenance, the Inspector General's report in that. But I know that you're capable of getting us the ash tree number. But let me just put a couple statistics out there. I don't represent Minneapolis, but it's part of the Twin Cities. 5,000 trees a year until the city's public ash trees are gone. That's how much we're cutting down a year. And in St. Paul, where I live, 8,500 boulevard ashes have been removed so far. The pace is increasing. We take them down in the winter, so when the little pests aren't active. But by the end, we think that we'll have over 60,000 trees will be gone. And it's important that we remove them in the urban areas because how they got here to the Twin Cities was hitchhiking on railroad cars. And so if we don't get them down as the railroad cars and the short lines go through, these little pests will figure out a way to get on them and go into more rural areas. So this is really an all hands on deck to reduce the spread of this from going any farther east than the Mississippi River. So I appreciate the work that the Forest Service Station and the Twin Cities on the St. Paul campus for the University of Minnesota is doing together. And this is all hands on deck. And we're going to see more and more of this as the climate puts more stress with the climate change on our forests and hardwoods. So I want to thank the Forest Service, and thank you, Mr. Perdue. It was a delight meeting you today. And thank you for your support of keeping our pristine waters clean in the northern part of our United States.
Thank you. We'll be closing down here in a minute unless there's any further comment. But one comment about these invasive species. Since I'm from California, and we have our, not just the bark beetle, which is obviously devastating the forest, but in the citrus, since we have you here in the citrus industry, which is kind of important in my state still, it's literally wiped out the citrus industry in Florida, as you know. It's in Texas now. the psyllid is in California, except that it's not infected at this point. And they found some in Hacienda Heights area. So,
Chairman, I just want you to know that in parts of Idaho, we consider Californians an invasive species.
Mr.
with
Chairman?
that, I think we'll may adjourn here pretty soon.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I would just, since the Secretary is here and he's been very gracious with his time, I wanted to just ask you, when you realigned USDA and you put farm production and conservation together, could you expound a little bit on how that relates to the Forest Service and our, what is your thinking?
Sure. As you know, NRCS was under the mission area of the Forest Service. The Forest Service has about a third of the employees of USDA and in many areas, and we've got a lot of challenges. As I went around and I heard, it looked like to me we had a lot of challenges for forest management in the Forest Service. I wanted someone, first of all, who was dedicated to resolving many of those issues of the questions you've raised this morning. The second point was NRCS is a customer-facing responsibility that is more aligned with the Farm Service Agency and the risk management from a producer standpoint. So those mission areas are going to be under one undersecretary that have three directors there that collaborate. Our data systems weren't talking to one another, and sometimes we were co-located, but there was a wall separating, and we act like we were separate agencies. So this is a customer-facing responsibility, trying to fulfill our customer service responsibility. The other thing on the realignment had to do with the rural development. I won't, as I said, I'm not a micromanager, but I'm a hands-on manager, and I wanted that person with access to me on a walk-in basis where we've got projects we can move quickly rather than having to float up through a chain and sometimes lose opportunities. So that was the purpose.
Just wanted to say that I would very much appreciate your review of my bill on a civilian conservation corps. You can redline it, you can amend it, you can do anything you want, but I'd be very interested to hear what you think about it and how we might achieve it. Thank you.
Thank you.
If I can close, I probably should have started this, but I wanted this to see in this packet. This is healthy forest versus unhealthy forest. This was from the Black Hills. I was there last weekend, and it just shows you what good thinning management can do. This is the mountain pine beetle, one of those species that can be those brown or where trees have died there. The green areas where they had been thinned ahead of time. That's why it's so important that we get the forest budget straightened out so we can do more of this all over our forests there. So we've used over 1,000 words, but that picture's worth 1,000 words there.
Well, thank you, Secretary Perdue. We appreciate you getting on top of this and working with our Chief Tidwell. We appreciate all your years of service, and with that, we are adjourned.
I'm certain that in future years, you'll look back at this as being governor of Georgia was your favorite years.